there is a possibility that when you take a leap of faith, you will actually be confronted with all of the shit that has been sitting in your life and in your being that you weren't looking at, which is what caused you to get to a point of needing to take such extreme action. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Rituals Podcast. I am so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for joining again. Today, we're going to talk about the truth about taking a leap of faith. So, a little bit about my credentials here. I first took a leap of faith back when I lived in California and I moved to the city of Long Beach from where I'm from, Chino Hills. I hadn't yet had an apartment and was having a really hard time finding one that met my parameters, which is a very much so a theme in my life. And I decided to take a 3-month sublease or just a regular 3-month short-term lease at a house that actually had, I think it was like 8 or 9 people total, including me living there. It was very much so a leap of faith, but it was in going there, living there, that I ended up finding the place, actually a place that I had seen a couple of years prior, that it had made its way back to me and that I lived in for a couple of years and had tremendous growth experience in, and met one of my dear, dear friends, who was my roommate at the time. When the time came to move from Long Beach, I felt called to move to Tennessee. Now, at that point, I had wanted to move out of state my entire life. I just never thought that I would have done it because it was one of my biggest fears. At the time, it was my biggest fear that I was aware of. And I also was at a job that it didn't make sense to do in, and there were other reasons, but ultimately, when the time came for me to move from Long Beach, there was nowhere else in the whole state of California that sounded even remotely appealing, and so I decided to book it to Tennessee. So I moved to Tennessee. It was one of the most difficult years of my adult life for so many reasons, and when it was time to renew my lease, I felt the call to leave Tennessee. Kind of in a similar way with California, when I was looking at other places to move to within Nashville, I realized that there was nowhere else in the state that I wanted to live. And so I decided to book it here to Texas, where I've been for a couple of years. And then my latest leap of faith has been leaving my corporate job of 8 years. It was a very secure job. I had a senior position. There's a lot of room for growth. If I look back at it, I can see how all of those leaps of faith actually culminated into me making this leap of faith in my career, which to date has been my greatest fear of, leaving that secure corporate job without a backup and without knowing what's next. But I felt the call. And when you feel the call, you're going to have to answer at some point. I didn't answer for 8 years when it comes to this job. I didn't answer for 8 years when it came to moving from Long Beach. I didn't answer for about 3 years. Luckily, by the time I got to Tennessee, I was starting to notice a bit of a pattern. And so within the first year, I knew better than to stay in a situation that didn't feel right. And I acted sooner. But that call is likely going to come back to you. And at some point, you're just going to have to listen. At some point, you have to take the out and actually just not only believe in yourself and believe in the higher path for you, but also just let yourself recognize that you're lucky enough to even sense that call. Actually, making me real emotional. But to be able to feel a call like that, a soul's call, is a blessing in and of itself. A lot of people don't have the fortune and privilege to be aware of a call, let alone to answer it. So if you are hearing me talk about this and there's a call that's been on your heart for a couple months, a year, an hour, maybe look into it. I'm just going to encourage you to do that. But I want to arm you with some information. Now, I come from a spiritual rhetoric that says if you take a leap of faith, then you will be rewarded. There's a lot of nuance in that, but I think and the sources I'm citing definitely cover those, but I think there's this general gist, especially as a spiritual person who's already doing work on ourselves, and I'll just speak for myself. As a spiritual person who's been doing a lot of self-development work on myself for a long time, both internally in terms of subconscious reprogramming and also externally in terms of aligned action and such, I took every one of these leap of faiths believing that I would be rewarded on the other side. I didn't have an idea of what that reward would be, though I had some wishes and I didn't have a time expectation on it or anything like that. But I thought that positive things would happen after I took these leaps of faith. And sure, there may have been a couple of small little tweaks of positive things that happened. But honestly, with every one of them, I was met with so much resistance. That resistance does not mean that these leaps of faith were not the right decisions for me to make, even though I thought that, especially when I moved to Tennessee. That's a horrible feeling. To feel like you answered a call from God and that it was the wrong answer is a horrible feeling. But But we have to remember that there is a much bigger picture afoot and that we are simply not aware of what all of the intricacies of that picture are. So, I want to just add more texture to this concept of taking leap of faiths and affirm that it's not just sunshine and rainbows. It's not, especially not immediately, not always. For some people, it is. We never know when we're ready for what we're ready for. But there is a possibility that when you take a leap of faith, you will actually be confronted with all of the shit that has been sitting in your life and in your being that you weren't looking at, which is what caused you to get to a point of needing to take such extreme action. That is a really sobering experience. It's a really beautiful experience because in that we can take responsibility for that decision for our lives and step into our agency so that we can use that to inform the decisions we make moving forward. And this is all good and normal. Like to, part of the leap of faith, there's faith is even in that phrase, right? Like part of the leap of faith is not knowing what we're jumping into. And we have to be, I think we have to be, mature about one, what we know and don't know, and two, that we might be confronted again with a lot of our shit that we need to work through in order to actually get to the point that we want to go and not just leave the point that we don't want to be at anymore. For me, that's looks like a lot of responsibility, in terms of accepting my role in getting myself in situations that did not serve me. It's also in that responsibility, accepting, finding compassion for, maybe even forgiving the people and circumstances that made those past situations so strenuous. In any case, I just wanted to leave you with a small tidbit that the leaps of faith are great. Like I mentioned in the first episode, it seems like a lot of us are going through transitions. And in those transitions, it means that we're facing a lot of uncertainty. The future is just not very clear to us in some way, shape, or form. And there's a tendency to just, grab from vine to vine, to just grab the next thing and to, in that, sometimes be taking these leaps of faiths. These are amazing, especially if it's been put on your heart to do it. Regardless, you're going to end up fine because I believe that Spirit has put that desire in your heart and it's for a grander reason that you nor I may be able to tell. But again, we have to take responsibility for why we were in the circumstances that we were, and also responsibility for our desires. Taking a leap of faith means actually moving towards what we want. And we do that by shedding an old skin, but also being so curious and in pursuit of the vision that we do have for ourselves. I think that is the whole point. That is the freaking human journey. That is the human spirit at its finest, which is my favorite essence to tap into is this pursuit of greater, and not just greater for the sake of greatness, but greater for the sake of elevation, of our soul's elevation, of this personality's elevation. I'm so curious about the leaps of faith that you all have taken in your life. If you feel called to go ahead and share it, in the comments of the podcast and Substack, wherever you might be seeing this. I would love to hear it. And with that, I'm going to bring this episode to a close. I will see you in the next one, and take care till then.